About 5 years ago, Dolores gave me a tape recorder because she wanted me to say something in there about my childhood and about my parents and my home and my family. And I never did get around to it. And I always kept thinking I was going to. But one day she threatened me to send someone out here to question me and tell me the story of my life and ask me questions and want me to answer them. And I knew that I wouldn't make good sense answering questions from a stranger like that, so I just sat down and just wrote whatever came to my mind. And that's why I call it ramblings, because I ramble from one thing to another, just whatever I happened to think about as I was writing, like writing a letter or something. So here we are. So I shall try to read what I have written before. And I call it Ramblings of Inez. You would have thought that the day I was born, November the 14th, 1908, would have been one of the happiest days in my mother's life because she had 5 sons and finally got a girl. But she said that by then she was so tired and worn out that it didn't seem to matter. She would have 3 children in diapers, Albert, 2 years, and Louis, 1 year, and I. No throwaway diapers then. I suspect that we were not changed every time we wet, but I can't prove that. We lived on a farm, so there were many chores besides the housework and bread baking. I must add, though, that Mama did take special pride in dressing her girl and buying pretty things for me. We went to Clifton every fall when Papa sold his cotton, and he did not object when Mama bought things for me that we really couldn't afford. I never asked for anything, except once when Dad was carrying me, I saw someone eating peanuts, so I started saying, "Pia, Pia," but they just laughed because they thought I was trying to say piano, because Dad had told me that someday we would go to town and buy a piano. I'm getting ahead of my story, but when I was 13, my dad went with 2 neighbors in a truck to Waco, and they came home with 3 pianos. Albert, Louis, and I take turns, or sometimes all 3 of us thumped at it. That is the same piano that Papa hired a neighbor to bring to Dallas. So Ned and Dolores took lessons at their schools. I took lessons from a neighbor at 30 cents for 1/2 hour. The teacher lived on top of the mountain, and I drove a horse and buggy. When I was born, my folks lived on a small farm near the North Church. I was the youngest of 6 children, 1 half-brother and 4 brothers. The only recollection I have from that place was when I accidentally got a ring, like a washer, on my tongue and almost choked. I don't remember this episode, but bore a scar on my nose for many years because my brother Louis hacked me with a butcher knife. He was only a year older than me. My other brothers were Richard, Hans, Fred, Albert, and Louis. When I was 3 years old, Dad sold their farm near North Church to my Uncle Charlie Ellingson. Dad bought a larger farm near the Rock Church. I don't think it was a coincidence that both of the farms were near churches, as my parents were very religious. Both my parents were from Norway. My mother came with her parents from western Norway, Stavanger, when she was 3. They were Bernard and Lisbeth Ellingson. My mother's name was Ingvelina. She had 2 brothers, Egert and Charlie. A sister Anna was born in the USA on a farm near the farm where I was born many years later. They were pioneers and took their clothes to Meridian Creek to wash them, about 2 miles. They walked to the creek. They raised their own cotton, and Grandma spun the cotton on her spinning wheel. They raised sheep for wool. This was also spun, and Grandma knitted gloves and sweaters for all. The spinning wheel is now owned by my cousin, Lillian Murphy, and she has it displayed in her living room. Her father was Egert Ellingson, and he inherited Grandma's farm because he took care of her for many years after my grandfather died. Lillian and her husband still live on the Ellingson farm, but have built a new home. The first house where my mother lived was a small rock house. My father, John Dahl, was 14 when he came from Norway with two older sisters. Their names should have been Hansen, as my grandfather's name was Hans. In Norway, the children, at least the boys, took their father's names and added son. But when they arrived here, they took the name of their place in Norway, as there were so many named Hansen. So they took the name of Dahl. I was always proud of my name. I thought the name Inez Dahl was pretty. The name Inez was Spanish and was pronounced Inez, and that is what I was called until one of my teachers told Mother that my name was Inez, and I liked that better. This is the same teacher who told my mother that I looked so pretty with my hair curled, and that she ought to keep it that way all the time. That was not easy, as my hair was straight. The curlers were called kid curlers, and how I hated sleeping on them. They were made of flexible wire and covered with kid leather. After the hair was rolled, the ends were turned out, and it made a good-sized lump. I liked the effect, though. Getting back to my dad, he and Aunt Mina and Aunt Leva were from Lutton. Their older sister, Aunt Carrie, was the first to come, and she worked doing housework, and she sent money for the three of them to come. They had tickets to New York and train tickets to Clifton. No money, but a basket of food. The girls got seasick and could not eat the food on the ship, so they ate the food in the basket. From New York to Clifton, 4 days. My dad said he had a piece of bread and a banana which a kind man gave him. They were met in Clifton by John Scow, who kept them until relatives from Hamilton picked them up. Papa worked herding sheep and doing other chores until he married. My mother and father met when he was a young man and came to a party at Norse from Hamilton, where he worked herding sheep for relatives at 50 cents per day with room and board. He rode horseback to the dance, as did everyone who did not walk. That would be a distance of about 30 miles from Hamilton to Norse. When we moved from the Norse community to the one near the Rock Church, it was known as the Arneson place. Mr. Arneson had built the 3-room rock house and also helped build the Rock Church. About the only thing I can recall from that period was that we moved in a hack. It was like a surrey, but not as fancy. We had a big, clumsy horse named Tom. There were 2 horses pulling the hack, and the roads were very bad, deep ruts in the road. Old Tom fell down, and it scared me. Dad got out and helped Tom up and came back laughing. That hack was to be our transportation until I was grown. I was embarrassed to be riding in it when other families started getting cars. I was very proud, though, when Dad bought a new rubber-tired buggy. We were the first ones to own one of those. We rode in it to school, Albert, Lewis, and I, about 4 miles. But my first year in school, we walked. Hans had to wait for me to get ready in the mornings, as Mom always had to have me looking pretty. We had to walk fast to get to school by 9 a.m. Hans walked and held my hand while I ran most of the time. It took about an hour to walk to school. In the afternoons, I walked with neighboring children. One was Blanche Turgerson, the other was Marlis Estrom, the pastor's daughter, who lived a stone's throw from the Rock Church. I spent many nights at her house in the summer. She and Blanche both had younger brothers and sisters, so I loved to take care of them. One thing I learned from Estrom's was an after-dinner prayer in Norwegian. At our house, we used the before meals prayer in Norwegian. I Jesu navn går vi til bords at spise og drikke på ditt ord. Deg Gud til ære og oss til gaven. Så får vi mat i Jesu navn. Amen. This after-dinner prayer stood me in good stead when a visiting pastor came to our house, and Dad invited him to stay for dinner, noon meal. I had already eaten, but I was the only one who knew an after-meal prayer, so I ate again. By then, I was confirmation age and felt that we should say a prayer after meals when the preacher was there. The prayer was, I Jesu navn så har vi ett. Av dine gaver så vi mett. Herre Gud, giv oss både nytt og gavn, at vi må love og prise ditt hellige navn. Amen. When I was small, the only Christmas tree was the big one at the Rock Church. There were no electric lights, so the tree was full of candles. I still have a couple of holders that my brothers picked off the big tree that had been left on when it was carried out. Because of the danger of fire, 2 men had snuffers and put out the candles if they set the tree on fire. It was also a big job to get all the candles lit. They used poles with candles on the tip for that job. We did not have presents at home either, but at church, each child received an apple, an orange, and a stick of candy. My first Christmas presents were from a teacher, male, who boarded at our house. I received a doll in a box and some doll furniture. My mother thought the doll was too pretty to play with, so she hung it on the kitchen wall. The teacher, named Sadler, saw it and immediately took it down and said he had bought it for me to play with. I had not started school yet. A few years later, my dad bought a folding table about 12 by 14 inches, and I had many tea parties on that table with my friends. Mama would let us use a napkin for a tablecloth, and she made tea cakes for us. Dolores used it too, but it was broken and lost. I started school when I was 7, but the trustees had to have a meeting, as the rule was children should be 8 years old. Louis started the same year, but he was 8. I begged so hard to get to go, so after 2 weeks of school they let me start. I had learned to read from my brother's books. I remember pestering my mother as she was using a rubboard washing clothes to ask her, "What is this word?" I don't know how my dad learned to read English, as he never went to school in this country. He must have had a good school to go to in Norway, as he was a smart man. He said he taught his parents to read and write Norwegian. He was a trustee at Meridian Creek School when I started. He took part in debates and so forth, and I was very proud of him. We children must have inherited some of his ability to speak from him, as all my brothers and I took part in interscholastic declamations and debates at the county meets. Our school terms were 6 months, and later 7, as children were needed for farm work. Also, that was long as I had money for teachers. The schoolhouse was one long room with a pot-belly stove in the center. It took a lot of wood to keep the room warm. The boys had the job of bringing in wood and feeding the stove. One little girl named Lizzie Butler had to stand in the corner, but being as it was cold, the teacher had her stand by the stove. She cried so much that the tears were rolling down her cheeks. She picked up her skirt to wipe away the tears, and everyone could see that she had no underwear. We went home and told everyone and laughed about it. But a neighbor, Mrs. Agnes Howell, said that she could not understand this, as she had a fine family. I was later to find out that accidents can happen to anyone. Dolores was 2 years old when I took her on the streetcar, and we started out for Baylor Hospital, where I was to have a radium treatment. When we got to Exposition Street, where we transferred, I noticed that Dolores had no panties on. So I went into a little store there and bought a pair for her, and we continued on our way. When Albert started school in the one-room schoolhouse, he, Hans, and Fred were in the program on the last day of school. They sang the song about frogs, and Mama and all of us learned the song. There were several verses, but all I could remember now is the first verse. Maybe Hans remembers all the verses. The song was, 20 froggies went to school down beside a rushing pool. 20 little coats of green, 20 vests all white and clean. We must be on time, said they. First we study, then we play. That is how we keep the rule when we froggies go to school.
That's okay. We'll just stop there, Mom.
All right.
You did a perfect job. I think you're a little ham.
You didn't sound nervous at all.
Nervous?
Well, no.
You enjoying it?
Yeah.
Or would you rather not?
No, I don't mind doing it, but who's going to listen to all this? Are we still taping?
See this little light?
Yeah, what does that mean?
It means it's on.
Oh. Well, what do you want me to do? Shut up or?
Well, is there anything else you'd like to say? This is all going to be erased anyway.
Hello, Diet.
Okay. Who is your favorite child?
You asked me that once when you were little. You say, Mama, you do like me better than you do Diane, don't you?
And you said yes, didn't you?
I said, I love all my children the same.
Listen to this, Don. Just listen to it. You have to bend over. Okay, say something to her.
Hello, Diane.
Hello, Mother.
Well, she needs someplace to sit down. Do you want to stop, or what do you want to do
We
here?
want to stop.
Huh?
Thanks for doing this for us, Mom.
Yeah. Oh, this is fun.
There's a lot of hours on
Yeah.
Well,
very well.
you'd be surprised how few hours I really did spend. It just rolled off my pen, that's why.
it. Gave you something to do, too.
Yeah.
Well, you'd be surprised how how long it takes to type.
I know.
How long did it take you to write it, probably?
I bet it does. Yeah.
Okay, we'll go in and
Not really.
It's a,
preview this.
it's a good thing you have this numbered.
Yeah. Well, how far did you get?
All right here on page 8, halfway down.
Halfway on page 8? Okay. Well, we'll just...
I finished the froggies. Are you going to turn it?
Did you forget to put in that about why the froggies? No, that was Deedle Deedle Dumpling.
Yeah.
Okay, well, froggies, we don't need anything. Okay.
Well, are the nursery rhymes things in this one? Turn it off, Paul. Continuing ramblings since our interruption. Louis got sick at school one day, and the teacher sent Albert to take him home. When I saw them leave, my earache suddenly got worse, and I asked if I could go home. I soon caught up with them, and we started the long trek home. We came to a little brook and stopped to drink. When we got home, Mama was disgusted with us, especially because a woman saw us and called Mama and said that her children were playing in the brook. No one liked this woman and hated to pass by her house. Her name was Peterson. She was married to Aaron's uncle, Chris Peterson. They had no children. After her husband died, she was alone, and maybe that is when she turned bitter. When she died, half of her money had to go to the Peterson heirs. Aaron was picked as one of 4 to receive several $100s each. It came in handy. In the summer, the Norwegian families sent their children to a parochial school. where we studied the catechism and Bible reading. We went from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. In the afternoons, we had Norwegian classes, which I loved. I learned to read and write Norwegian. It was funny to hear some of the children try to pronounce the words. Even the ABCs were hard for some who did not hear much Norwegian at home. We did, and Hans and Fred could not speak English when they started school. They learned quickly, and we, Albert, Lewis, and I, learned from them. The teachers were not Norwegian, which was a good thing. That is why I don't believe in bilingual education in our schools. They never learn English as well and speak it with an accent or brogue. The Mexicans can teach their own children about their heritage, just as the Norwegians taught their children. Each child paid $2 or $3 per month, which was to pay the teacher. That does not seem like much now, but it was a hardship for them. We went in July and August, hot. Besides, Spanish is an elective subject in high school where they can learn it free. Before I started school, Albert and Lewis and I were playing in the barn. They built small piles of corn shuck, then set fire to them. I did the same and said, "Look at my fire." It was bigger than theirs, and they started trying to stomp it out as they sensed it was too big. They could not put it out, and how we got out alive, I don't know. My dad was in the field almost a mile away and ran all the way home, as he did not know that we were safe. My brothers must have let the horses out, as they were okay. But Dad's corn and grain were all lost. Carl Swenson's father was a neighbor, and he came with a wagon load of corn. The barn burned to the ground. Dad built a new barn on the other side of the house and painted it red. We children played there a lot, but didn't build any more fires. When Hans and Fred came home from school and saw what had happened, they told the three of us who set the fire, "You'd better put on a lot of clothes because you're really going to get a whipping." But we didn't even get scolded. They knew we were sorry, and besides, they were so thankful that we were safe. Paul? Several years later, on April Fool's Day, Fred came running in where Mama was cooking and shouted, "The thresher shed's on fire." It scared Mama so, and she complained, but never once did she raise a hand to slap any of us or spank. She did raise her voice so many times, and that was enough for us. There were a few times when Mama asked Papa to whip us, especially the boys. Once when we were caught chewing tobacco was one of those times. Fred, Albert, and Lewis each got a couple of licks. Then when it came my turn, Fred said, "She didn't chew tobacco." I really had, but did not tell. Fred made me quit chewing tobacco when I was about 10 years. He told Albert and Lewis not to give me any more tobacco, as I was getting too big. Years later, Mama said that she regretted the whippings the boys got for chewing tobacco. When we chewed, we'd go by the garden and get an onion to eat, because Mama always smelled our breath to see if we'd been chewing tobacco or smoking cedar bark. Once I got tobacco juice on a new doll dress that Hans had helped Mama make. I was scolded for that, you bet. My first year at school, I won a dictionary for being the best speller in my class. Hans won one for being best in his class, and Albert won one also from his class. Mine was red, which I still have. Theirs were black. I was embarrassed one Friday afternoon when we had a program and the teacher called for volunteers. My hand went up, and when it was my turn, they announced, "Next is a recitation by Inez Dahl." They had always said speech before, so I was not sure if mine was a recitation. So I mumbled so they could not understand me. in spring, which should have been, I had a dog. His name was Ring. When he died in spring. In my second year at school, we still had literary society every Friday afternoon and volunteers to speak or sing. One little boy who had a bigger sister told him to volunteer for this gem. I had a little rooster. I kept him in a pen. When I let him out, he jumped on a hen. We had a new school building by then, 2 rooms, which we called the little room for the first 5 grades. The big room was a big event for us to get into. My first year in the big room, a new teacher was in the little room named Zenobia Scow. Her father was John Scow, who was kind to my dad on his trip from New York. He placed a frame motto in the little room, and I memorized the first few lines. Thank God every morning when you get up that you have something to do that day, which must be done whether you like it or not. I did not quite agree with it then, but I do now. Work is a character builder, and a job well done brings a good feeling. Ganella and I were invited to spend a weekend with Zenobia at the Scow home. We had never been into a city home. It was like a mansion to us. They had a big family, but their house was always in perfect order, as the children were not allowed to waller on the beds. They had a music room upstairs and many bedrooms. Mr. Scow served the meal from a stack of plates at one end of the table. The youngest son, John Butler Scow, lives in Dallas and is president of the Vikings of the Norwegian Society of Texas. I finished 9th grade. That was the extent of my education until I was 50 years old. Then I took a correspondence course and finished 2 years of lessons in 7 months. I was so very proud and pleased. I had pictures made of myself and announcements made for my parents and brothers to surprise them. Also for Dolores, John, Joe, and Ned, as they did not know of my studies. Of course, Paul, Aaron, and Diane knew, but they didn't say much. Before they came home the day I got my diploma, I went over to show Mrs. Bethencourt. She was a dear friend and like a mother to me. The next Sunday when we picked her up for church, she had a graduation gift for me. It was a scarf and a pair of hose. No one else gave me anything, and I was not expecting anything. But getting that diploma meant so much to me, as I had felt inferior because I did not have one. My friends Jewel, Myrtle Turgerson, who married Barton, and Clarice Bertelson, who took my place at Bronsted store when I left to get married, did not finish high school either. The nearest accredited school was 20 miles away, and there were no cars or buses. The American School of Chicago was the name of the correspondence course school I chose from an ad in the Dallas Times-Herald. One of my elective courses was etiquette, and the teacher was Elizabeth Peterson. She wrote to me and asked if I were Norwegian. We corresponded several times. She sent me some brochures about rosemaling, or rose painting in English. She taught rosemaling in Chicago. I wish I could have taken lessons from her, as I admire that form of art. I was surprised and pleased when Papa came home from Crampus Gap the summer when I was 16 and said that Mr. Bronsted, who owned a general store at Crampus Gap, asked him to see if I would like to be a sales lady for him in the dry goods department. The store was huge, with groceries on one side of the wall and clothing of all kinds on the other. My side of the room had piece goods in shelves on one side and men's, women's, and children's shoes on the other. In the center were tables of men's work clothes in the back part, and in the front we had display cases where we had cosmetics and notions of all kinds. We sold a lot of thread to go with the piece goods. I really felt mature taking on those responsibilities. Mr. Bronsted told me when I cut the first dress length, "Hold your tongue straight now, Inez." He was a kind man, and every child who came into his store received an apple or a piece of candy. The men, Mr. Bronsted and 2 sons, and a couple of hired hands stayed on the other side of the wall where the groceries were. Farmers brought their eggs, cream, and butter in to sell. My mother sold butter made in the pretty butter mold. Mom's butter was always in demand as it looked and tasted good, made from the cream from registered Jersey cows. There was a county agent who got Dad to sell his scrub cows and get the jerseys, which produced more milk. My brothers fed them and kept a record book of how much was spent for feed and how much was realized in profit. Louis and Fred took their cows to the fairs at Meridian and Clifton and won ribbons for them. Albert specialized in judging cattle and won a trip to Chicago because of it. The girls in all the schools were busy with the county home demonstration agent who helped the girls with sewing and cooking. I won a trip to the summer short course at A&M because of my neat buttonholes. I had learned to sew from my mother, who made all our men's shirts. Once she made shirts for 4 Swenson boys. She took the shirts to Cramples Gap to a big bazaar held on the street and bought the shirts back and gave them to Mr. Swenson. It may be that she was repaying Mr. Swenson for his kindness in bringing the corn when our barn burned. Folks in those days helped each other. We know that people still do help each other. We found that out when Aaron was sick so long and passed away. Our neighbors and friends from church were very kind. In 1902, my dad ordered a sewing machine from the Montgomery Ward catalog for $11. When I first remember it, it still had all the drawers. Now it has none, but still works. Mama had varicose veins, and it was difficult for her to use the treadle machine, so we children took turns at operating it manually by sitting at the back and pushing the wooden piece up and down. After Mama died, I asked Dad to let me buy the machine for the price he had paid in 1902. He was glad to get the money as he was saving for a trip to Norway, which he made when he was 92 years old. It was good to see how happy he was. My mother and I made quilts from Bull Durham tobacco sacks. It was a job to rip them open, then wash and dye them. They were the right size for brick quilts. My brothers and Aaron smoked Bull Durham and rolled their own cigarettes. Lillian and her mother, Minnie Swenson, helped us to quilt several. I loved to go to quilting bees until my eyes got bad. We would line the quilts with feed sacks, dyed to match the quilts. We also used feed sacks to make pretty dresses, curtains, and so forth. When Dolores was in high school, she had many sack dresses. One of her friends, Lita May, was jealous because of the pretty clothes. I'm not sure that we told her they were made of sacks. When I worked at the store, I contracted yellow jaundice. My skin and even the whites of my eyes turned orange color. I felt all right, but nothing tasted good. I had room and board with Binus and Merle. I stayed from Monday through Thursday with them. Binus was Alton Tyndall's brother and Aaron's cousin. Merle was a good cook, but when I had jaundice, I couldn't eat the lunch Merle brought. She worked across the street from me for the Ford Company, of which Aaron's father was one of the 4 owners. One day for lunch, she took me to the cafe where they had homemade pies. I selected a big piece of banana pie. I did not enjoy it and never wanted banana pie again. The Wickmans, who owned the cafe, named their new baby Inez after me. Merle had been saying that one day she would go with me to see Dr. Plinicky to see why I was so yellow. I decided I would go to see him myself. Why did I need anyone to go with me? I was so naive that I did not know that it did not look right for a young girl to go to a doctor alone, as he had no nurse. He had sense enough to know that he must leave the door open. He felt in my stomach and asked questions and said I had jaundice, a disease of the liver, I think. That summer, my brother Louis and Wilma Hanson, Jewel's sister, had the same disease. It is not supposed to be contagious, so I don't know why we had it. Dolores had yellow jaundice at the hospital in Gary. Going back a couple of years to when I was 14, when we went to the A&M, we had demonstrations every morning and afternoon. We learned how to make beds properly, how to care for our complexions, and so forth. Almost every afternoon, two elderly gentlemen from Comanche, one was editor of the Comanche News, the other was the father of my friend and neighbor, Mrs. Agnes Howell. She was a Hoff, and Belinda's uncle was John Hoff. Asked us to go to the ice cream parlor with them. They asked questions about my schoolwork and so forth. Mrs. Howell seemed a little embarrassed when she read the article in the Comanche paper about their trip to A&M, because it singled me out as the beautiful, intelligent friend of Mr. Hoff's that they had met. She gave me the article and I put it in my scrapbook. I still have it. I guess she thought they were silly old men. The same summer, I won a trip to the Dallas Fair because of my chickens. I raised them and was supposed to have fed them and kept a record on them. I had other things to do, so Mama fed them. I'm afraid I cheated a little on the record book, as it was mostly guessing. Anyway, we had a good time at the Dallas Fair. I represented Meridian Creek School. Belinda was a representative from the North School. Our schools were very competitive, so we were on opposite sides many times, but we remained good friends through the years. One of the yells when our baseball team played Norris was, chew tobacco, spit, spit, spit. Norris, Norris, ain't worth a bit. Teacher appointed me to be cheerleader. I liked the boys from Norris better than the ones from Meridian Creek. I loved to go to Norris for the last day of school. The boys from Meridian Creek were mostly brothers or cousins or unexciting. In my second year at school, one boy, Knut Knudsen, had a crush on me and bought a birthstone ring to give me at Christmas. It must have cost all of 10 cents. Knut also bought my basket when our school had a box supper. The ladies would decorate shoe boxes and fill them with goodies. Inga volunteered to help me with mine. She and Richard lived near us then. They bought the place from Blanche's folks. My basket was covered with blue crepe paper, and Inga made tiny pink roses to almost cover the box. The top was covered separately so it would lift off when eating the good food. My box was the prettiest one there. Knut bid $2.10 to get it. The other boxes were sold for 25 cents or a little more. Knut's dad got a big kick out of it. Knut was the brother of one of my best friends, Gunilla Knudsen. She never married and taught school in Austin for many years. Gunilla is Myrtle Dee's cousin, and she is now 1988 in the Clifton Sunset Home, suffering from Alzheimer's disease. I don't go to see her, as she does not know anyone and hangs her head. I could not stand to see her like that. She was very artistic, taught art in the Austin schools. I still have a handkerchief that she made for me. I thought it much too pretty to use and wanted it for a souvenir. Once she made a coat for my doll out of a rabbit fur. How proud I was of that. I learned all I ever knew about sex from her. How ill-informed she was. I learned when I married that sex is not only for making babies. When we first married, we went to a doctor in Gary for advice on how to avoid getting pregnant. He said he would like to help us, but that it was against the law. This Dr. Stone later delivered Dolores. Birth control methods came too late to help us. I can truthfully say that none of our children were planned, but were welcomed with open arms when they came. We had the prettiest and the smartest children in Dallas. I may be prejudiced. This good speller struggled with prejudice. But everyone commented on our peanut blondes, as they were called then. The blonde hair and penetrating brown eyes caused comments. Dolores, at 2 years, told a lady at church who had not made comments, "I got pretty brown eyes." She was wearing a white coat which I had made, and a brown derby hat with a feather which I bought, probably for $1, as we had very little money in 1929. Aaron had started a job at the Adolphus Hotel, where he worked in the storeroom for $75 per month. Later, he was promoted to buyer and received $25 per week. I was so happy, but unhappy when he quit because of differences with someone. He started working for Fink Wholesale Grocers. He later worked for Cullum Grocers, and the last time with Affiliated Grocers. He said later that he was sorry that he quit at Cullum. In all the years Aaron worked, he never missed a day of work. I forgot to mention that Lewis was also at A&M for the short course. I went with Ganella's father, and Lewis went with Thelman Rogstead in his dad's new Model T. I don't remember what the boys were there for, but the way I remember it, it was mostly for girl watching. When we came to the Dallas Fair, we went in groups. Miss Lambert, home demonstration agent, appointed Belinda and me to be leaders when we walked 2 by 2. But when we went our own way without watching the others, we were demoted to being followers. At the big barn-like building where we stayed on the fairgrounds, none of us had seen a urinal before. So when all the basins were busy in the morning, Belinda and some others stood over the urinal to brush their teeth. I have a picture taken from the Farm and Ranch magazine where we made a visit. We were especially anxious to meet Aunt Sally, who had an advice column that Mama and all of us enjoyed reading. I was disappointed much later when I found out that she was a fictional character and that there were several Aunt Sallys during that time. We rode the streetcar to the magazine, and also when we made a trip to the zoo. We had never seen a streetcar before, nor had we ever ridden the train, nor had we seen an elephant or other zoo animals. The first time I saw any Mexicans was when I was 10 or older. They were traveling through Bosque County to get to West Texas to pick cotton. They were traveling in a covered wagon. They saw our windmill, so they came by to get some water. My brothers and I tried to talk to the children, but all we could get was see, see. I was grown before I saw a black person. They were not allowed to spend a night in Bosque County, but could pass through on their way to West Texas to pick cotton. I don't remember seeing any blacks until we went to Gary, Indiana. Gary was a steel mill town, and many nationalities lived and worked there. We rode on a streetcar from Gary to Tolliston, a suburb, to see Olga and Uncle Bear. In 1926, when we were there were no restrictions about where blacks could sit. So it was not unusual, if I were by myself on a streetcar, to have a black man in his work clothes come in and sit beside me. On our way to Gary, we had passed by a black school where the children were at recess.
That's it.
This is after recess in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. It was such a novelty that we stopped to take pictures. I have one in my album. My first recollection of Jewish people was also in Gary. The merchants were all Jewish. Our first apartment was with a Jewish family. The husband had recently died. Mrs. Bartnowski was scrupulously clean. She scrubbed her kitchen floor on her hands and knees using a scrub brush. Then she kept papers on top of the clean floor. She kept her icebox on the back porch and told me to help myself to anything in there. I never did, but it was interesting to see the food. She always had cantaloupe and other goodies. She gave Dolores her first bath and taught me many things about child care. We lived upstairs and usually used the outside steps to reach our nest, as we did not want to bother them by passing through. I could look down into our neighbors' yards. An Irish family lived on one side. They drank a lot and had verbal fights. The reason I mention them is because they had a precious 5-year-old boy named John Joe, and I decided to name our first boy John Joe. I liked the name John so much, and I thought the two names together were cute. This little boy had tight blonde ringlets all over his head. His face was always dirty, and so were his clothes, but I loved him, and sometimes got permission to visit him while Aaron worked. I saw Aaron, who was to become the great love of my life, when I was a barefoot girl of about 10. I just got a glimpse of him from across the yard when Aaron came with Blanche's brother to visit my brothers. He was a cousin of Blanche's, and he stayed with them quite often after his mother died. I knew even then that he was special. Later, when I was 12 or 13, but still barefooted, I took the eggs to town to sell them. I used the buggy, and when the men at 4 Company saw me, they sent Aaron, who worked there, to get my crate of eggs. I was very conscious and bashful about my bare feet when I saw him. He told me years later that he was smitten the same as I was. We did not see each other often as we went to different schools. He was almost 7 years older than I, so when Hans and Aaron went to Tyler to go to business school together, I saw him several times, but not to talk to or anything. It was not until the summer when I was 14 when I went to a Luther League meeting in Waco with another boy, Alvin, and his sister. He was jealous and didn't want me to talk to anyone else. He was older and drove his dad's sedan. He taught me to drive. Anyway, Aaron winked at me as we met on the church steps. I can still remember the excitement I felt and how he looked. He was wearing a cap. Most of the boys, including my brothers, were wearing what we called hard-boiled hats. I was not dating, as I had to be confirmed first. All that summer, Alvin came over to our house and we visited in the living room. He went to Clifton College in winter. Louis and Albert were chaperones. It was usually a dull conversation, so one evening Louis fell asleep, and before long he let a windy. That did not awaken him, but the rest of us didn't laugh or crack a smile, but were as solemn as judges. I think that was the last of Louis's chaperoning. We sat on the sofa, the same one I now have and treasure. My parents received it from some people named Hanson. It was second-hand then, so I don't know how old it is, but over 100 years. At that time, it had a bed inside it, and I remember sleeping on it with my cousin Clara Pearson, Fuquay now. It wasn't comfortable to sleep on, nor to sit on either, as the springs were worn out. We had it made over in 1975. We had a chair covered in the same red velvet material. This rocking chair was given to us by Mrs. Grimes when she moved out of our rental apartment, where she lived for many years. She gave her glider to Aaron. They used to sit out there and talk and watch the traffic. I saw Aaron again just before he and Hans and Fred went to Gary to work in the steel mills. He asked me for a date, and we double-dated with someone. I don't remember who it was, as I was spellbound. He asked me if I'd ever had a butterfly kiss, and when I said no, he asked if he could show me. So he put his face up to mine and blinked or fluttered his eyelashes against my cheek. He went to Gary the next day, and I did not see him again until he came home. We dated for 3 months, and then he went back to Gary as there was no work around Cramples Gap. By then I learned what a real kiss was. This time we corresponded, and I looked forward to each letter. I received many presents from Gary, and I was so happy. He admitted later that his cousin Olga Swenson helped him to select them. She and her father, Uncle Bernd Swenson, made all the boys from Bosque County welcome in their home. And when I came to Gary, I spent much time with them, especially when Aaron worked the 4 to 12 shift. Once when Aaron worked the 4 to 12 shift, I went with Olga and her dad to South Chicago, where he was a former pastor, to a bazaar. When I got home, I could not get one of my galoshes off as the zipper was stuck. I went to bed with one shoe off and one shoe on, just as in the nursery rhyme. Deedle deedle dumpling, my son John went to bed with his stockings on, one shoe off and one shoe on. Deedle deedle dumpling, my son John. This was John Joe's favorite rhyme. Aaron got home about 1 a.m. and got the shoe off. We had a cute apartment on the second floor. It was a kitchenette, living room with a Murphy bed. We bought furniture, $300 worth, for which we paid $7.50 every 2 weeks. When we left, we sold it for $100 cash. The reed couch made a bed, and when we had company, we used that. Fred spent several weeks. He looked for a job in a barber shop as he wanted to marry Lillian and move to Gary. He had no luck, so he went home. He found a job as barber in De Leon, Texas, but had to give that up because he was allergic to the hair. I started working at Grant's store in Gary, but quit as we could not be together as much as we liked, because I had to go to work in the morning before he came home from the night shift. I did not get real homesick while in Gary. Mama kept the letters coming, 2 or 3 per week. She also sent the Clifton Record. She would roll it up, put an envelope on it, and a 1-cent stamp. She and Inga made a huge box of candy, put it in a tin, and mailed it to us at Christmas, but we never received it. I'm sure someone enjoyed it, but it was a disappointment to us and to Mama and Inga. This one time, when I cried of homesickness, was when I received a letter from Sylvia, Erno's mother, asking me to be an attendant at her wedding to Hans. I was great with child, so of course could not accept. Aaron really felt sorry for me then. I missed Fred's wedding to Lillian. They married in June, and we went home in August 1928. We stayed with my folks until fall when we came to Dallas for Aaron to brush up on his business courses so he could get a job in Dallas. But about that time, Aaron's father decided to quit the Ford Company and get his own store. He wanted Aaron to go in with him, and they intended to put in groceries, but that did not work out for some reason, so it was a dry goods store only, called the Peterson store. We moved into Grandpa Peterson's house on the hill, which had been rented to Aaron's uncle by marriage. We paid $6 per month for rent. That became hard to pay, as we had exhausted the money we had saved in Gary. We had bought furniture and did have a neat place in the good garden back of the barn below the hill. Dolores was 1.5 years old, so I carried her up and down the hill. I had a miscarriage, and Mina stayed with us for several days. She was about 12, I guess, but could do anything. She gathered vegetables from the garden and cooked them. We had a gasoline stove, ordered from the catalog, Sears, I guess. We had to pump air into it, and it scared me a little, but did a good job. We sold it when we left Cramples Gap to go to Dallas because there was not enough income from the Peterson store for 2 families. Aaron got a job at the Adolphus Hotel, and we rented an apartment for Mr. Amundsen's sister, who had lost her husband, Carrie Smith, on Chrysler Street. It was when we lived there on Chrysler Street that I made daily trips to Dr. Carey because of my eyes. While we were still at the Gap, my eyes became red, swollen, and itched like crazy. I went to a Dr. Alexander in Meridian, and he called it granulated lids. I could turn my eyelids over and see bumps all over. The doctor scraped them off, and I used hot packs on my eyelids to get relief. Every morning they were swollen shut and full of pus. When I developed an ulcer on the eyeball, the doctor said I must see a specialist in Dallas. Dr. Carey did not work on my eyelids then, but operated on my nose, removing a bone. That might be what they call a deviated septum now. I was in the Medical Arts Hospital for several days with my nose plugged up with yards of gauze. The Dr. Carey was elderly and as gruff a man as I ever came into contact with. My nose did not heal, and every morning he would insert a needle that looked like a steel knitting needle with cotton dipped in argiron. He left that in for 15 minutes or so. The eyelids did not heal, so they sent me to Baylor Hospital for radium treatments. They didn't hurt, but didn't help either. The radium they used looked like little pieces of lead from a pencil, but silver-colored. Dr. Carey had a woman assistant, Dr. Viola Scanlon, who told me one day, "Why don't you go to an optometrist and get a pair of glasses?" I did, and found Dr. Kleiser, who said he had treated his sister for the same trouble that I had. He fit me with strong reading glasses. I could see only a few feet in front of me. He said I was far-sighted and that my eyes did not pull together, so it caused eye strain. I could not see to read or sew for 5 years, and for most of that time, I had to use the hot packs. We taught Dolores to add to her prayers, "Please make Mama's eyes well." I know I had the prayers of many others as well. We had no radio and, of course, no TV, so it was a boring time, besides a very painful one. Aaron would read to me, and I looked forward to having him read a story. The paper had continued serials. He read with a monotone voice just as he sang in monotone, but I was grateful for the times he read. Louis sat next to Aaron at church once and could hardly control his laughing. I don't think Aaron ever knew about his singing. His was a soft voice, and we miss it now. Louis had a good voice for singing, and so did Pinky or Levy Bryn. He was Inga's brother and lived with them. He would come up, and I would play the piano, and the three of us would sing. Before I went to Gary, Olga formed a quartet and had them sing at church once. I'm sure once was enough. Aaron, Alton, Reuben, and one more were in the group. They sang one of Fanny Crosby's songs. Sorry about this. I couldn't turn the pages. Aaron's voice probably sounded like alto and may have blended in. Jewel and Wilma Hanson were neighbors. We did not go to the same school, but in the summers we had a sewing club. We would meet at each other's houses and bring scraps and sew for our dolls. Once when I was too little to sew, Inga, who still lived at home, asked me to bring my doll so she could dress it up. She started by making a corset. It had staves and everything. Then she made a corset cover, a dainty vest which all the ladies wore over their corsets. So when they wore georgette blouses, all you could see underneath was the lace-trimmed corset cover. Hans left home early to work for my uncles and others who needed a work hand. Once he went with a combine crew to the Dakotas to work with the wheat and oat crops. My father always used a reaper to cut the grain, and we kids had to carry and stack the bundles. Then the thresher crews came and threshed the grain. It was sacked to be sold. The straw that was left made a big straw stack. We loved to play in it, but it did make us itch. Then we would go to the tank to get washed off. The company thresher was stored at our house on off seasons. We played in there a lot with those big machines, the steam engine and huge thresher. Blinda's father ran the steam engine and my father ran the water wagon. He would haul the water from tanks for the steam engine. The threshing crew moved from farm to all the owners' places. It was the duty of the women on the farm to prepare 3 meals per day and 2 in between lunches. I helped Mama cook and serve the meals. Inga always helped, and we set long tables. They never stayed more than a day. At night they slept on cots which they carried with them on their wagons. My brothers went with the crews. After I married, the company bought a lunch wagon and hired 2 cooks. The thresher shed was stored up on a hill at our house. I used to go back of it and recite poems and practice my declamations or debates. I was always happy when the teachers assigned something to memorize. We lived at the Rock House about a mile from the Rock Church at the time I married. My brother slept upstairs. Once when it snowed, the snow came through the holy roof. The boys had many comforts and blankets. Dad patched the roof, and when Dolores was 2 years old, he had a man help him put a new roof on. Grandma asked Dolores to tell the men the coffee was ready. She would go out and yell, "Coffee, man!" They remodeled the porch and put in a concrete floor. When John Joe was 2 weeks old, we were visiting from Dallas. My mother and I were on the porch talking and knew that Dolores, who was 3.5 years old, was standing beside us and thought she was holding her doll. Instead, it was her baby brother. It's a good thing that I could get hold of him before she dropped him on the hard floor. We spent many weeks there visiting, so our children have fond memories of those days. Dolores talks about the 3 wash tubs on benches on the porch where we washed clothes on a rub board in the first tub and rinsed in the other 2, using bluing in the last tub. We boiled the white clothes in a big black pot in the yard. We filled the pot with water carried from a hydrant on the porch with a bucket. Our soap was made in the same wash pot. The soap was made by using bacon rinds and grease to melt and then add lye. We stirred the pot of boiling soap with a large paddle. We would cut the soap into large pieces when it cooled. To wash clothes with it, we would cut off slivers. Mama also made musmar, a sweet cheese, somewhat like goat cheese in the wash pot. She could have sold any amount she made, but we kept most of it for ourselves. She made the musmar from the whey when she boiled sour milk. That was boiled down and sugar added. She used the cottage cheese to make a white cheese, sort of like Philadelphia cream cheese, but much stronger and very smelly. She added caraway seeds for further seasoning. It was a standing joke to many about the gammelost, or old cheese, which the Norwegians made. But after tasting it, other nationalities liked it too. We called everyone who was not German or Norwegian Americans. Even though we had a windmill, we would sometimes run out of water for the flowers, so I would draw water with a bucket from a well and carry it to the flowers and sprinkle it on with my hand. The windmill was a lifesaver, providing cool, fresh water. There was a large storage tank to hold extra water, as sometimes the wind did not blow enough to turn the wheel. We always kept a dipper on the windmill so we could drink fresh water. Because of the good memories of that mill, I have always liked windmills, and Paul knew that when he bought a small one for our patio here on West Jefferson. This story is being written because Dolores instigated it. She gave me a tape recorder 5 years ago and asked me to tell about happenings with my parents and places where we lived both before and after I married. I did not get around to do anything about it until she threatened to send a woman to question me, and all I would have to do is to answer the questions. I knew I'd say things that needed more time to think about, so I started writing anything I could remember, just as it came to mind. That is why I call these scribblings ramblings, because they are not in sequence. Here are some more remembrances from the rock house where I grew up and where Dolores and Johnny spent much time. She mentioned the trumpet vine and the rose bushes. Mom and Dad bought 5 at one time and let us choose one each to call our own. There was one white, one pink, one yellow, and the one Albert selected was an American beauty, a deep red. As I was the youngest, I took what was left, and if I had been the first to choose, I would have chosen it, as it was called Baby Rambler and had tiny pink roses. I have one here that is very similar and blooms its heart out, even though all the nourishment it gets is water. When Dolores was 2 years old, we were at Grandma's, and I heard Dolores crying at the top of her voice. When I went out to see about her, she was standing on a chair by the American Beauty bush. When I asked what was wrong, she sobbed, "I was going to take me a flower, and here she came." She didn't know. She meant that Grandma caught her trying to steal a rose. She had carried the chair from the hall and down some steps. She did not know that Grandma loved to give bouquets to anyone who wanted them. There was a chinaberry tree close to the back porch. I learned from Rowena Ryerson how to make a necklace out of the berries. We boiled the berries, and the pulp all boiled away, leaving a pretty scalloped seed about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. We dyed the seeds purple and made a pretty necklace. I don't remember if the seeds had holes for stringing or if we used a needle. We found out that Grandma had buried Amy Turgerson's finger behind the chinaberry tree, but she would not show us the spot. Amy lost her thimble finger when she put it on the block where Blanche was chopping kindling. They had no phone, so Aunt Josie carried her to our house, and Dad took her to Crampus Gap to the doctor. The doctor said if he had the finger, he could sew it back on. So they drove back home and picked up the finger and went back to the doctor. He could not use the finger as it had been too long since it happened. We lived 4 miles from Crampus Gap, so that made 12 miles in a buggy, and that took too long. I don't know if Amy ever knew what happened to her finger. The chinaberry tree figured again in helping to potty train Dolores. She was 2 and not trained. Once when I was gone, Grandma could see that Dolores needed to have a BM, so she took her behind the tree and let her squat. Grandma was pleased and said she had done a big clump. That is Norwegian for lump. After that, we called it kump and used that for all the other children as they came. When we were at College Station, A&M, on the last day, everyone assembled in the auditorium for a program. Someone was chosen from each county to tell her about their county. Miss Lambert chose me to represent Bosque County and suggested that I tell that Bosque County had been called the Little Switzerland of Texas. At that time, I could talk without notes, short speech. After I sat down, one of the big shots said that he agreed with that, as he had been there. Another thing he said that stuck with me was consider the postage stamp for its stick-to-itiveness, its ability to stick to one thing till it gets there. I was to meet Miss Lambert, who was then Mrs. Orbeck, many years later during World War II. Her husband worked in a defense plant in Dallas. At Ladies' Aid, when the discussion was about temptation, she said, "If you have never been tempted to sin or form a bad habit, there is no glory in it for you that you did not do it." As I was kneading bread this morning, 2/4/88, I was reminded of a summer when I was 13 going on 14. Mama had a chance to go to Oklahoma to visit her sister Tora with my uncles Egert and Charlie and probably Aunt Annie Hoff. She enjoyed the trip so much. My aunt had 15 children, but most of them had married. Mama said she felt guilty, though, leaving me with all the cooking for the 5 men and a cousin visiting from Hamilton. He was seeing the doctor for boils and risings, as we call them. Cousin John was so handsome, I wished he were not my cousin. I had watched Mama bake bread, but had never started from scratch. My 6 big loaves turned out well. Guess who carried in the wood, built the fire in the wood stove? Hans and I were going to Waco for the 3-day Luther League meeting, so I had to iron our clothes. I used 4 irons that heated on top of our wood stove. With a potholder, I would use 1 iron till it cooled off, then change for another. In the summer, that was a hot job, but we did not know anything different. But some people, including Inga, were getting gasoline irons. Hans was quite perturbed when he put on his shirt, as one of the cuffs was not ironed, and I heard from him later when he told Mama that he had to keep trying to get the wrinkles out by pressing them with his hand. He went in a car with some friend. That was the same meeting when Aaron winked at me and sent me for a spin. Alvin was to see to it that I did not get near him again, near Aaron. Forgetting to iron one of the cuffs on a shirt happened to me several times later, as when I ironed so many shirts for Aaron. He did not like that any better than Hans did. Susie to Lloyd once said that she wished she could iron shirts the way I did. We had a washing machine that had a roller wringer, and it had a habit of popping off buttons. I tried to sew buttons back on, but sometimes missed. I nearly got hysterical with laughter when at one of our couples club's meeting, while we were playing rook, I noticed that Aaron had stapled both cuffs shut. Guess I must have missed 2. I think I know why I fell so hard for Aaron. We were opposites in so many ways. I loved to dance, but he didn't. I guess I missed that more than anything. He did try, though. He and Albert just didn't seem to be light on their feet. Fred and Louis made up for them. I was pleased when they asked me, their sister, to dance. Another reason Aaron was different, that he was slow to compliment. I missed that sometimes, as I'd been used to praise during my dating years. When I was 15 years old, I won the cake at Meridian Creek School Carnival in the Prettiest Girl contest. A few weeks later, I went to a carnival at Mustang and won the cake there. I did have to run, but friends paid so much for votes. When I was 16 years old, I won the cake at Cramples Gap's Carnival. When Aaron came from Gary to marry on March 25th, I was to meet him in Clifton at the bank where Hans worked. Jewel and Alton took me, but the roads were so muddy that we got stuck and we had to get out and push. The slush went over our shoes, but we went on to Clifton and saw Aaron standing at the door of the bank, but did not stop, as we didn't want him to see us like that. We went to a distant cousin of Jewel's, and she let us clean our shoes in her kitchen sink. Aaron was not in a good mood by the time we got back to him, as we were late, but he soon forgot about that. We saw each other almost every day until we married on the 8th of April. Aaron's folks were kind enough to let us use their almost new Model T. Jewel and her mother gave me a shower at their house with the assistance of Agnes Howell and Caroline Jurgensen. About 5 years later, Caroline was killed in a cyclone while visiting her boyfriend's home in Malone, Texas. Hans was best man at our wedding, and cousin Clara Pearson was maid of honor. She was secretly married to Robert Fuqua, but did not reveal that until he graduated at John Tarleton. They came to Dallas to go to dental school. When we moved to Dallas, we saw them often. She babysat Dolores and Johnny several times when Aaron got free tickets to go to plays downtown. We saw E.G. Robinson before he got famous. The place was strictly dishonorable. I remember one of his lines, "Live a full life, and when you're old, you will have reminiscences." Another actor was Lyle Talbot. He was handsome, and I saw him in movies later. Fred and Mama went with me to Waco to buy my wedding clothes. Fred had bought a Model T second-hand. My folks still used the buggy or hack. In Waco, I bought my dress, a beautiful white satin dress trimmed with beads and lace. The gossip soon got around that I had paid $25 for it, which was a big amount in 1926. I bought a lavender silk nightgown. When Dolores was 3, I made a pretty dress with smocking with the lavender gown. Aaron said I felt like cotton in it. He was wearing long handles. I bought white pumps, size 5.5. They seemed big enough but too tight for walking. I wore them anyway, and we walked many blocks to church in Gary. Services were held in the YMCA, and Uncle Barrett was minister. It was there where Wilma Finstead was baptized and confirmed in the Lutheran Church. I made her confirmation dress, a peach-colored organdy. I had no pattern, so I used one of my dresses for a sort of pattern. Olga had lent me her sewing machine, a portable electric. Getting back to the wedding, Papa bought many gallons of ice cream, and Mama and Inga were busy making cakes for several days. Mrs. Howell also helped decorate the house. She thought it'd be nice to use a big bow in Meridian Creek's colors, which were black and red. Mama did not think too much of that, but agreed to put it in the boys' room. The colors were chosen by Ganella and me for our basketball team. We had red blouses and black bloomers, the real full kind. Clara came a couple of days early, and Mama wanted us to decorate the living room with a dusk, Norwegian. She got miffed at us because we could not understand what she wanted us to do. We always acted silly when we were together, and still do. Hans wanted us to be sure to be on time, so we started baths early by bringing in a number 3 tub and heating water on the kitchen stove. We took turns. We still have the outdoor toilet, too. They did not have plumbing until they sold that farm and bought the small farm where I was born from Aunt Julie Ellingson, as I think Uncle Charlie had already died from a rattlesnake bite. The way I remember it, Dad sold our farm near Rock Church for $10,000 and bought the smaller one for $3,000. That way they were able to get out of debt. I remember when I was small, Dad had to borrow money to pay the interest on what he owed. The county agent had helped him and other poor farmers to build up their land by terracing and fertilizing. Huh?
You want to stop?
All right.
Okay, we're on.
You ready? The other attendants at our wedding were Alton and Jewel, Louis and Aaron's cousin, Wilma Jewel Pendleton. Aaron did not seem to want to go through with it because when the preacher, Reverend Ernest, asked for his I do, he answered with a barely audible, I do. But when he asked me, I spoke loud enough for all to hear. I meant it, too. A group of singers from Meridian Creek, of which Louis was one, sang, Believe Me of All Those Endearing Young Charms. I still like that song and play it on the piano keyboard that my children gave me for our 60th anniversary. When we left for our honeymoon, a one-night stand in Waco, I realized that I had no makeup with me, so we drove to Mrs. Howell's and rummaged through her dresser drawer but could find nothing. I had to wait till the next day and bought some someplace. Aaron was embarrassed when he picked up my suitcase and found it to be so light. I had packed only a gown, robe, house shoes, and underwear. He was afraid the porter would think that we were not married and just out for a good time. When we got back home, Clara was still there, and she and Louis had put cockleburs in our bed. The next day, Louis went with us to Hamilton to take Clara home. We ran out of gas, and the boys had to go to a farmhouse with a can to get gas. Before we got to Clara's house, we got stuck in the mud and left the car a mile or so down the road. We pulled off our shoes, and the boys rolled up their pants to the knees. That is how Aunt Leva first saw Aaron. Clara gave us her single bed for the night, but it was big enough. We had planned to go to Gary right away, but I found out that another couple was getting married and was going to Gary in his new Model T. So we waited a couple of weeks till they married and rode with them. We were to buy the gas, which was a good deal for both couples. Barton and Myrtle were already in Gary, and this was her brother, Clarence Turgerson, and his wife, Drusilla, a lovely couple. But they did not stay in Gary long, as Barton had been laid off from his job, and Clarence could not find work either. So they all four moved to Janesville, Wisconsin, where they found work. We borrowed Uncle Barrett's car, an old Model T, and went up to see them one Sunday. We left early, as it was 250 miles up there. We went through Chicago, and it seemed so far as we could not go fast. We had a couple of hours with them. They had cooked a good meal, but it was 2 or 3 p.m. when we got there. It was still a longer ride home, and after midnight when we got home. We had a flat tire and no spare tire, so we rode in on the rim for about the last 10 miles, or maybe it just seemed that far. Other couples came up from Texas. Guy and Wilma came in October and stayed that winter. So did Niles, Tyndall, and Pearl. They both lost their jobs, so they went on to Janesville, too. Guy and Wilma stayed in Janesville until we came home in August 1928. They came by Gary in their sedan, and we had bought a Dodge sedan. It had room for us to hang a swing, canvas for Dolores to sleep in. We slept in our tents. When we got to Gary, we went right to Olga's. She cooked a lovely meal for the four of us and for Barton and Myrtle. We were sorry when all our dear friends left Gary, but other dear friends came. Sanders Anderson from Clifton married Ruby Billert and came straight to Gary. Wilma Finstead and I decided to walk over to see them one day. Sanders had gone to work, and Ruby fixed lunch for us. They became close friends of ours, and when we left Gary, we left Dolores' bassinet with them, Sanders and Ruby. Before our children came, we used to play 42 once a week. We played 42 once a week. We usually served hot chocolate and pie. I don't know why I can't make good pie crust now like I used to. When Dolores was baptized, Olga carried her, and Sanders and Ruby were sponsors also. When their baby was born, we were sponsors for him, Sanders Jr. We have kept in touch with him all these years, and when I worked at Sanger's, he would come in to see me. He still works in Dallas. We had other friends, too, in Gary. A brother and sister named Nelson we saw often. He had a car, and once we drove 20 miles, which used to be far, to a roadhouse to get beer. It was Prohibition times, so maybe it was illegal. I thought it tasted awful, so they said put some salt in it. But the home brew was still bitter. When we went back to Gary on our 25th anniversary, we had a lovely lunch on Sunday after church with Lester Nelson and his wife, Bertha. They married about the time we left Gary. We visited other friends, too. Dolores was able to get free tickets for us to fly to Chicago. When we left here, it was 90 degrees, and when we arrived in Chicago, it was 50 degrees with a strong wind blowing off Lake Michigan. Aaron was wearing a straw hat and a light-colored off-white suit, so people stared at us. Some of them were wearing caps with the earmuffs down. I had a lightweight suit, too, so we really got cold while waiting for a commuter train to Gary. After a couple of days, we caught a bus for Rockford, Illinois, as Olga had married and lived there. She and Uncle Barrett left Gary the same time we did. He preached in Durand near Rockford. Olga and Porter had adopted a daughter. Karen was 8 when we saw her. I had brought her a dress, and she liked it and called it her Texas dress. I have a photo. I've been writing about my side of the family because the Peterson family has been ably covered by Eulalia in her family tree story. Aaron graduated from high school at Cranford's Gap. He let me wear his class ring when he went off to Gary. I loved it and thought of him every time I looked at my hand. I still wore it after I received my diamond engagement ring. He had bought a matching wedding ring, but did not send it as he was saving it for the wedding. Barton came home at Christmas to marry Myrtle. He had so little money that he asked to borrow the ring Aaron had bought for me. Myrtle didn't know it was mine and became so attached to it and wanted to keep it. We bought another ring for me, and I helped pick it out at Burns Jewelers in Gary. I don't wear rings except when I go to parties and so forth. I have my mother's gold band, so when I wear my gold Timex watch, I wear it on my left hand and Aaron's gold band on my right hand. When I wear my silver Timex watch, I wear my white gold rings. Aaron wore his wedding band and graduation ring. The date on the graduation ring is about worn off. When he lost weight, he lost both rings in the yard while raking leaves. We all searched for them but could not find them until Paul brought a friend who had a metal detector. He lost them again later, so Paul brought the man again and found them. Aaron decided not to wear them but kept them on his dresser. Diane was amused when I told her how Aaron and I were issued driver's licenses without a test. It was in 1935 that he came home from work with 2 applications, which we filled out, and he gave them to somebody at work who turned them in. It cost us 25 cents to register, and we renewed them in plenty of time each year so as not to have to take a test. Diane was surprised when I told her that my first pair of nylon stockings was during World War II. Everyone wore rayon or cotton hose. Aaron gave the hose to me at Christmas. I'm sure one of the women he worked with bought them for him. They had seams up the back. I kept them up with garters. We were visiting at Grandma's house when my feet got cold. I put them up on the side of the wood stove, and immediately a big hole was burned on the bottom. The heat just melted the nylon. I wore them anyway, so the hole didn't show. This story reminds me of another one about a hole. I wanted to go with my dad to church one Sunday. He always went early to ring the bell. I got dressed in the white embroidered dress I was to wear. When Mama inspected me, she found a tiny hole in the skirt and wanted me to take it off. But I was so anxious to go with Dad that I said, "Oh, that won't hurt. It's on the men's side." At the Rock Church, the ladies all sat on the left side of the church and the men on the right side. The girls sat with their mothers and the boys sat with their fathers. I meant that the hole was on the right side and the men wouldn't notice. I was teased plenty about that. I have told what the bride wore at our wedding, but did not mention what the groom wore. Aaron wore a double-breasted blue suit with a white tie and a boutonniere. But can you believe he wore spats? I have never told anyone where or how Aaron proposed. No one ever asked. Anyway, we were in his Studebaker coupe. Lila Hopp, a dear friend, and I started calling it our car when we talked about it. Someone, maybe Olga, had made curtains for it so it was cozy, and we thought it was lovely. Aaron and I were at our usual parking place by the Meridian Creek Schoolhouse. After a few hugs and kisses, he asked, "Do you love me?" And of course I said yes. Then he said, "Enough to marry me?" And of course I said yes. He said he would go back to Gary to try to save enough money for us to get married. This time it was really hard to see him leave. He sold our car and took the train. He and Hans had driven home from Gary in the Studebaker. I think that Hans started working at a bank in Clifton then. Mama was teased a lot by all of us for a couple of funny or dumb things she did. I will tell them before I tell of some of my embarrassing times. A turkey hen had laid eggs in the open field. While Mama was seeing about the hen, there was a swarm of bees about to get to her, and Papa yelled to her in Norwegian, saying, go runt, meaning go around. Mama started going around like a top. Then Papa yelled at her to go around the other way to get away from the bees. Much later, after they got their car, Dad thought he had a flat tire. Mama got out to look, got back in the car and said it was okay. But when the tire started getting worse, Dad got out and saw the tire as flat as a pancake. He showed it to Mama and she said, "Oh, I didn't look at the bottom." This joke or tragedy was on my dad. Dad thought he saw a jackrabbit in the field and took his gun and shot it. But when he went to pick up the rabbit, it was Mama's turkey hen that he had killed. He was really scolded for that. It was about sundown, so he could not see that well. I'll tell of some of my embarrassing moments. When I was about 10 years old, I went with Jenny Anderson to spend the weekend with her aunt and uncle, the Barrett Rogsteds. They had some other company, too. And as we were eating supper, I noticed that the lady's sleeve was about to get into the butter, so I was going to warn her. And I pointed to the butter and said, "Your sleeve is about to get in the butter." But as I pointed, I went too far, and my finger went into the butter. I had no napkin and tried to hide my greasy finger. I guess I rubbed it off onto my other hand, as I didn't want it to get on my clothes. When I spent a night with Marlis Estrom, I fell and hurt my leg between the knee and ankle. Her mother put a bandage on it, but when we went to bed, it hurt real bad. Mrs. Estrom asked how my leg was, and I said, "It gives jerks." When she said, "It's pounding," I felt so embarrassed. I still have a scar. When I went to Waco with Alvin and his sister, he asked me what I was going to be when I grew up. I answered, "A stenographer." I knew what it meant, as I had read a lot, but had never heard it pronounced. I felt ashamed when he pronounced it correctly. He was at Clifton College Academy to get his high school degree. When I was in the 5th or 6th grade, I was in a debate about slavery. I had read Uncle Tom's Cabin and brought out how ill-treated the slaves were, so I said, "They whipped them with long blacksmiths." I meant black snakes and thought I had said that. I could not understand why everyone laughed until they told me what I said. I'm sure they thought I didn't know any better. When we were in Gary at August for a dinner, I said, "Oh, now I know what the initials stand for on our salt and pepper shakers." It was hard to make out, but I decided one was a B and the other an S, so I said, "They stand for Baron Swedson." How everyone laughed at my expense. It was P and S. The most painful of my embarrassing moments has to be the time I was asked to play the piano at Our Lady's Aid. I had read in etiquette books that one should never have to be begged to perform. The trouble was that I had not touched a piano in 15 years. I don't know what happened, but it did not seem like I was playing the same song they were trying to sing. Maybe I wasn't, or I overlooked the sharps or flats. When the ordeal was over, Ned said, "I didn't know you could play the piano, Mama." Belinda is probably the only one who remembers it besides me. I wonder if that is the reason I get so nervous now when I play my keyboard. I can play the hymns and psalms perfectly when I'm alone, but hit many wrong notes when I play for my family. Paul thought I should omit this embarrassing incident, but Diane said I must add it, and as it hurts no one but me, here goes. We were visiting at the Rock House, and Aaron had our car parked just outside the fence in the front of the house. He was waxing it, and I went out to help, as usual. But before I started, I decided to relieve myself by squatting on the other side of the car. After I started, Aaron said, "You know who's under the car?" Then I heard Albert's embarrassed laugh. I beat it into the house in a hurry. Albert was working under the car. This happened to me when Aaron and I went to the Hemisphere, or was it called Hemisphere? Anyway, we were John and Kay's in San Antonio. They told us to take Highway 35, so I was watching out for that when I said, "Oh, there's number 35. So Aaron backed up to get on 35, and he said, "Oh, that's the speed limit." We got lost hunting for 35 in the fairgrounds. We finally did, and when we parked, there were very few cars there as it was early in the morning. We were supposed to meet Mine and Ira there, but never did see them. We had been with them the night before at Aliface for a Peterson reunion. We had a nice day at the fair, but when we got ready to leave, we could not find our car, as we had not noticed the number on the post near where we parked. Now it was crowded. We looked for 30 minutes. Another time we were lost in Bergen, Norway, while out walking alone. The hotel where we were scheduled to stay was being remodeled, so we were at a different hotel. We could not remember which hotel until Aaron remembered that he had a key in his pocket. When I asked in Norwegian how to get to that hotel, the young man answered in English. I had not talked Norwegian in about 50 years, so he could see that I was struggling with it. After being around Olga Lovelin and her family, I got better at speaking Norwegian. And when we came home after our trip, I took out my father's Norwegian Bible, and ever since then, I've been reading a chapter every day and comparing it with the English version. I have gone through the complete Bible in both languages 3 times. I also like to read other magazines in Norwegian, but they are harder to read because they use nynorsk or New Norwegian. Paul brought back a Reader's Digest in Norwegian when he and my father went to Norway when Dad was 92 years. What a good time was had by all. Paul got tired of hearing only Norwegian as my cousins could not speak English. Their children spoke English, however, as it is taught in the schools there. My dad was pleased to see that his relatives were now well off and had lovely homes, because that's why he and his brothers and sisters came to the United States. There was no work for them, and times were bad. But they all had hard times here, too, for a long time. One thing that grieved Papa was that his relatives in Norway were not as religious as they used to be. The beautiful church in Lutton, where Dad was baptized and confirmed, was used mostly for weddings, funerals, Easter, and Christmas. The time we went to the Lutton church, there were about 6 children baptized. The babies wore long dresses to the floor. The boys had long blue ribbons, and the girls had long pink ribbons. They all wore caps, and before they were baptized, a sponsor would remove the cap, and after baptism would put it back on. That was the custom here in the States until about 1930. A single sponsor would take off the cap, and a married couple would carry the baby. The woman did that job. Aaron had 1 living brother, Barton, and 3 half-sisters and a half-brother, J.P. They were all adorable, and I loved them all. The sisters were Mina, Eulalia, and Alfie. These 3 sisters and their husbands, Ira Dahl, Glenn Knudsen, and Terrell Miller, Aaron and I made the group of 8 who went to Norway and 6 other countries in 1970. I'm forever grateful to them for including us. When I had talked about when we would go to Norway someday, Aaron would say, "Why do you talk so silly? You know we'll never get to Norway." We had been so poor all our lives, but started to get well when we finished paying for our home on Page Avenue. Then, when we had a chance to sell that home at a big profit, we were able to pay cash for our duplex on West Jefferson with some left over for a nest egg. My working for 23 years helped. Before I started working for Sanger's, I kept children for 5 years at our home. One of the sweet children I took care of for 3 years was Lisa Edwards. I affectionately called her Lisa Pisa. She and her sister Cindy are like grandchildren to us. Their parents are Jim and Janine Edwards. They came to live in our duplex on Page Avenue when they married and stayed until Cindy came. Then they bought a home, and Janine quit working for a while. Jim's mother was a neighbor of Belinda's and heard from her that we had an apartment to rent. Jim and Janine became like family to us. They joined the Lutheran Church over on Rosemont, and Gramps and I were sponsors for Lisa and Cindy when they were baptized. By the way, Jim was the first one to call Aaron Gramps. Then everyone started calling him that, and he loved it, just as I enjoy being called Grandma. Our trip to Europe included seeing and hearing the Oberammergau Passion Play at the foot of the Alps. In those days, it was shown once every 10 years. Now, they show it much more often, maybe every year. We saw it in 1970. Hans and Clarice were there in 1971. On our European tour, the plane landed in Bergen, Norway. I had heard about Norway all my life, but was not prepared for the awesome sight, to me, of the houses, pink, blue, and other colors that covered the hills all the way to the top. The fish market, the flower market, the boats anchored there just took our breath away. My dad had not been to Bergen until in 1972 when Paul went with him. On their return trip, after spending several weeks in Norway visiting relatives, they flew home from Bergen. My father forgot that they had the seatbelt on and tried to stand to say farewell to Norway, as he knew that he would never see it again. He was 92 years old, was so happy to be in his beloved country again that he had energy to spare. Paul said that he made it up the steps to the museums without trouble. I have not mentioned our trip to the Holy Land in 1976. There were only the four of us on this trip. Mina, Ira, Aaron, and I joined a tour group in Houston led by a Methodist minister from Orange, Texas. We were asked by several which trip we enjoyed more, the one to Europe, Norway, and so forth, or the one to the Holy Land, where we went to Europe, Asia, and Africa. The trips were so different, but both exciting for us. Rome was interesting. We went to the catacombs. I had heard about them from history and so forth. We went down several flights of stairs with no light except candles. We held on to each other to keep from falling. Our guide was telling about the early Christians who hid there. The tours to the Vatican and the Sistine Chapel were unforgettable. We did not spend as much time there as I would have liked, but had to stay with the tour. In Athens, of course, there was the Acropolis. We spent quite some time there. I picked up an olive seed that had petrified. I glued it to a medallion that I had bought in Bethlehem. A rock that I picked out of the Mediterranean also found a place on the medallion. We went to Corinth and saw the ruins there. We remembered St. Paul and his journeys. In Egypt, we were warned not to drink the water. We stayed several nights in the Cleopatra Hotel in Cairo. It was not an American hotel. The bed sheets were clean, but there were bed bugs. I had not seen any bed bugs since I was a child. Once all the children at Meridian Creek had head lice. Blanche can attest to that. Our mothers combed through our heads with a fine tooth comb, using coal oil on the comb. We knew where they came from, as we could see the bugs crawling on the boys' necks. One boy sat in front of me. Getting back to Cairo, we saw the Sphinx, the big one. I had always thought there was only one, but there were several. They've had to do restoration work on them since we were there. The pyramids were there, and we went to the top of the largest, climbing up narrow ladders from one landing to another. Mina asked if we wanted to wait for them as we got nearer the top, but we both wanted to brag to our friends back home that we'd been to the top of a pyramid. The worst part of it was that Aaron's new shoes were high around the ankles, and as we went up the ladder, they rubbed blisters. For the rest of the trip, we had to doctor Aaron's feet. Mina came with more bandages. It slowed us down as Aaron limped a little. We wanted to buy tennis shoes for him, but could never find a store that had anything but souvenirs. From Cairo, we went through Amman, Jordan, on our way to Jerusalem. We had to go through customs to pass to Israel. The Americans had no trouble, but the others had to empty all their luggage on long tables, and their clothes were thrown around, ugly to see. There were soldiers everywhere with guns. Our tour guide lived in Jerusalem, but was an Arab who happened to be a Lutheran. He and his family worshipped at the Lutheran church built by Kaiser Wilhelm during World War I. We looked inside the church, but went to Easter services at the site of the empty tomb. There was a large crowd. Before Easter this year, 1988, Diane took me to Trinity Church in Cedar Hill. We were both so moved by the performance of the Passion play. I was reminded of the way I felt when we saw the Oberammergau Passion play. Also, of when we walked the Via Dolorosa, the path where Jesus walked in Jerusalem. Another touching time in Jerusalem was when our group from Texas went to a place on a hill where a communion supper had been prepared for us. We were all allowed to keep the little wooden glasses we had used for communion. We had been to the room where Jesus had the Last Supper. Even though it may not have been the exact room, it was one like it, and we felt very close to our Lord. I forgot to say that while in Egypt we rode the camels. They put scarves on our heads to make us look like Arabs. I sort of cringed at putting them on, as I knew they were not clean. I'm glad that we have pictures of us on those camels. We brought back hats made from camel skin for Tim and Kathy. At our hotel in Jerusalem, we met a large group of Norwegians. They were singers, and as we waited for our turn to eat, we heard them singing a Norwegian table prayer. After dinner, they went into a large room and put on a program, and some of us attended, Aaron and I and Ira, maybe others from our group. We kept running into the Norwegian group on our tours and other places as we stayed in Jerusalem 4 days. I loved to look in the gift shops and came home with quite a few inexpensive souvenirs. I bought one nice keepsake for us. We had received cash from relatives for our 50th anniversary, so I used some of that. I still have some of the $2 bills we received from Eulalia and Glenn. They had almost gone out of circulation, as there was too much confusion about the bills. They were mistaken for fives many times, just as the Susan B. Anthony dollars were mistaken for quarters. The keepsake I bought was a mother-of-pearl Lord's Supper in a stand. I keep it on my table with a lamp behind it. It is translucent, which makes the figure stand out. I bought some jewelry just outside of King Tut's tomb. You could hardly walk because the peddlers hawking their jewelry and cutting prices. From a little boy, I bought silver necklaces, 2 for $1. We were fortunate enough to have other trips in the U.S., to California many times, to Florida to see Ned while in the service. I went to Hutchinson, Kansas when Ned received his wings, a proud moment for both of us. When Diane was in Virginia, we went to see them. She and Bob met us in their car. We drove to Washington, D.C. to sightsee. Pauline, Irene's mother, lived near there, so we stopped by to see her. She fried a platter full of fresh fish. I helped gather corn from their gardens, so we had that and lots of other goodies. We went to New York City over protests from Aaron, but he was outvoted 3-1. He did not like New York because of what he had seen when he took Dolores and Robert to New York when they left for France. The car was shipped overseas, and Aaron flew home. I liked the hustle and bustle of New York and was glad when I had an opportunity to go for a longer stay. This time we went for Richard's wedding to Helena. Her family came from Sweden, and her father married them. Lovely people, and I should like to see them again. Maybe if Richard and Helena settle here in the States. They are both artists, and we are proud of them and my great-grandson, Christopher. Robert, Dolores, and Karen showed me around New York, and I enjoyed every minute. We shared one large room. Aaron and I went to Virginia when Ned was stationed there. He took us out in their motorboat, and Mark and Noel did some water skiing. We went to Washington, D.C. on that trip also. I went alone to Virginia when Diane had the twins, Kathy and Susan, but Susan did not live. I made arrangements for the burial here at Laurelland, Babyland in Laurelland Cemetery before I went. I stayed till Diane was able to fly home with me. Aaron and I went to Wisconsin Dells to visit Olga and Porter Smith. While there, my cousin Lillian Ellingson Murphy and her husband Milford came to visit the Dells with her uncle from Rockford. What a surprise to see each other there. We all went through the Dells together and had a great time. It must have been 1981 when Aaron and I went to Baker, Oregon to see my cousin Julia and her husband Ray. They met us in Boise, Idaho, as that was the closest commercial airport to their place. I did not know that it was 150 miles from their home, but it gave us a chance to see some beautiful country. We spent 5 days with them, and each day they took us to new places. Aaron and Ray hit it off so well and kept up a steady stream of conversation. Julia and I had so much in common. We were the same age and both had been sales ladies. We had corresponded when we were girls, but were 73 years old before we met. She was the daughter of my Uncle Hans, or Henry as he was called. My dad, his brother Martin, and 3 of his sisters, Aunt Mina, Aunt Annie, and Aunt Julia, were on their way to Oregon to see their brother, whom they had not seen for about 40 years when they had a car accident. They had a blowout, and Dad lost control of the car. It got in the wrong lane, and when Uncle Martin fell out, he was run over and killed. They all came back on the train and shipped the car. It was so sad. My dad went on the train the next summer to see Uncle Henry, but the ladies never did get to go. Julia gave me some snapshots of her father, my dad, her son Ray, and Dad's brother Ludwig, who lived in Oregon. They had a fine reunion. Now they're all gone, and so are Aaron and Julia's husband Ray. Paul, Ned, and Nicole were recently in Portland and went to see Julia. She called her son, and he came for a visit also. Julia wrote that she was so glad to see some of her family. I went alone to California, and Ned took me to Victoria for his wedding. Aaron had had an eye implant and decided not to go. Besides, he didn't want to wear a tux. He said it was too fancy for him. Laurie met us at the airport, and I fell in love with her immediately. I was not prepared for her darling parents. The whole trip and the wedding were just too much. Before my next trip to Victoria, Aaron had passed away. What a sad time for us all. We thought he would recover until right at the last. He had never been sick before except for when he hurt his back several times. We thought it was muscle spasms until they took x-rays just before he died. They said he had 3 cracked vertebrae. The x-rays showed that he had 2 tumors in the colon. One, at least, was malignant. I feel that God was merciful in sparing him the pain of surgery and possible colostomy. Aaron had been fortunate in having good health. He never missed a day of work in his life, except time out to take me to the hospital. Even then, he did not miss the whole day. When Robert married Venetia in Vancouver on July 18, 1987, Paul and I went to Vancouver. Dolores and Ned met us there. The boys shared a room near ours. It was a sweet wedding and lovely reception. We were pleased to meet Venetia's family. We attended a cocktail party given by Al the night before the wedding. Dolores had to return to Dallas, but Paul and I went with Ned to Victoria, Canada, to meet Laurie, Nicole, and Stephanie at her parents' home. What a beautiful home and yard. We went to see the Bouchard Gardens. The photos from there can only partly show how beautiful they are. But we thought Hibby's yard was just as beautiful, but smaller. In writing of trips we took, I have not told of the time when Ned called and asked Aaron to bring our passports with us to Orange County. But Aaron was not to tell me about it. I found the passports in his pockets when I was packing, but didn't tell him. I kept wondering what Ned had cooked up for us, but I did not come close to guessing that he had planned a trip to Baja. He and Laurie rented a one-engine plane and took us for our first deep-sea fishing experience. Ned was the pilot and Laurie the navigator. We had some harrowing experiences, and Ned loves to tease by asking if we were ready for another trip to Mexico. The scenery was breathtaking. On our return trip, the rock formations looked like beautiful planned rock gardens. Ned said, "You have to believe there's a God when you see such beauty. You just feel it." I get that feeling when I see the wonders of nature. The hymn, "My God, how wonderful thou art," comes to mind. Aaron said that he thought of the doxology, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow." Irene formed a foursome for a journey to Hawaii. Her mother, Pauline, her sister Paula, and me. It was a beautifully planned trip to a beautiful state. The first night out, we went for a sail on a catamaran. There were surfers all around and Diamond Head in the background. After dinner, the Hawaiian entertainers asked everyone to hold hands for dancing. I should have stayed put, as a girl from Australia dug her high heel into my instep. I pretended it was okay, but it got worse, and I spent the next day in bed while the others went to Pearl Harbor. I was able to go on the rest of the tours, but made a nuisance of myself by having to put my foot up every chance I had. From now on, I shall take Laurie's suggestion to behave myself on the first night out while on a trip. She remembered the time in the park when everyone went down the slide and Aaron said, "Aren't you going?" In my slick jersey dress, I went down so fast and hit with a thud. I had to sit on a pillow for the rest of the trip. For the first date I had with Aaron, I wanted to look especially pretty. All the cosmetics Mama and I had ever had was face powder. I heard that some pinched their cheeks to make them rosy. I did not try that, but for this date, I put cake coloring on my lips to make them red. I also put on some of Hans's Bay rum. I think it was for aftershave lotion. I didn't know that, so I used it for cologne. Aaron noticed and said, "Seems like I smell bay rum." I did not comment. Hans and Aaron must have bought the bay rum in Tyler when they went to Tyler Commercial College. Neither one of them had any extra money, so I'm surprised that they could buy anything more than bare necessities. When Aaron was in Gary, I started using rouge and lipstick. We were half grown before we had toothbrushes. Our schoolmates did not have any either. There was a certain tree that we used to call the toothpick tree. We would break off small pieces and chew the end. It had a good taste and also cleaned our teeth. Our first Christmas tree was when we lived in the rock house near the rock church. Louis and I went out in the pasture and he chopped down a small tree with an axe he'd brought along. We probably set it in a bucket with rocks around it for a stand. We had only a few decorations and candle holders. Mama gave us some cranberries to string and also popped corn on her wood stove for us to string. From then on, we had a tree every year, and in Mama and Papa's home in Clifton, Mama always wanted a tree. She had either bought or made gifts for every one, including grandchildren. The last year of her life, she gave me and all of her daughters-in-law a milk glass candy dish. When we were small, we did not receive many gifts at the church Christmas tree, but all that changed when I became a teenager. Each year I received more, and it was almost embarrassing to hear my name called out so many times. After the rock church stopped having a tree, we had it in the big church at Krampus Gap, and I received so many gifts, mostly boxes of candy. One boy didn't even sign his name, so I had to guess at the donor. I kept my boxes of candy in the dresser drawers of the same dresser I now have in my room. It was varnished then, while now it is painted white. My folks bought the dresser from Estrom's when they left Texas. I'm sure it is well over 100 years old. Irene put the gold trimming on the dresser. In moving to Dallas, the bolts, or whatever they're called, were lost, and I had no way to attach the swinging mirror until Myrtle D told me that she had a set that she would give me. I was so pleased. Paul put up the mirror for me. Irene helped paint it. About the candy, I was not too fond of it, so when it disappeared piece by piece, I did not complain. One of my brothers must have enjoyed it. Try to finish reading where we left off last time in my story, Ramblings. We had to leave off because I didn't talk fast enough last time and get it all on 2 tapes. So here goes number 3. My father was custodian at the Rock Church for 20 or more years. Once I went with Louis and Albert to clean the church on a Saturday. We put sweeping compound on the floor before we swept. We did not do anything to the pews, and one lady complained to my dad that the pews were dusty. He rang the big bell in the belfry by completely turning it over. This he did every Sunday morning before the sermon, and after the service he pulled a rope that was attached to something that made a faint ringing sound. But he rang the bell on Christmas Eve at 5 p.m., and on a clear day it could be heard at Crample's Gap. We were supposed to have our houses cleaned and the meal of rice and ribs ready for the Christmas holiday. Dad had firecrackers and Roman candles which he set off. We children had sparklers which we lit from the wood stove in the living room. I remember the smell and the sparkles. Dad also rang the big bell for funerals. He would start ringing when the hearse was about a mile away. Before the people started using a hearse, wagons were used to move the coffins. No one was embalmed in those days. They were dressed in black with hands interlocked as if for prayer. My dad was called several times to help prepare the corpse. Mother helped when the corpse was a woman. In my span of almost 80 years, I witnessed many changes. The first cars, at least in our neighborhood. The first radios. My brothers had a crystal set built by a neighbor, John Rogsted. They had headphones. Once I actually had a chance to listen and heard the cowbells from WBAP. We got our first TV, a month, I think. Johnny and Ned made the down payment, and Diane and Paul gave their all. Dolores had married and was not with us. Guess who made all the other payments? I was so pleased to have it, as we seldom went to a movie. John Joe saw a movie that was so different that he insisted that we go. He bought our tickets and offered to babysit with Paul and Diane. Ned went with us to the Texas Theater on West Jefferson. It was the first of the Cinerama pictures and the best one. We went to all the others too. It made you feel that you were actually in the roller coaster, the airplane, or whatever. We have Johnny to thank for that experience. I won't mention the fact that Johnny and a boyfriend who helped babysit took the kids with them to a beer drive-in. Hans and Clarence came up and spent the night with us when he had bought tickets for the 4 of us to see one of the last of the Cineramas, the Brothers Grimm. We enjoyed that too, especially the company. That was one of the few times they spent the night with us. When I was asked to write or record the story of my beginnings, all I could think of was the cotton patch and other farm work. I served my time chopping cotton, corn, and carrying bundles during harvest. Once when I was 4 or 5, I wanted to help a neighbor named Tora Strand who worked for us in chopping cotton. I went ahead of her and pulled up every plant. Mama and Tora were flabbergasted. In my 2nd year of school, I was asked by 2 of the big girls if Richard were my brother, and I said, "He is my half-brother." They giggled, and I understood that something was different, but I did not dare to ask anyone. I know that Mama would have told me if I had asked, although when I asked her where I came from, she said, "Up in the mountains." None of the girls my age knew about babies, but I am sure that the boys knew everything. In those days, girls who had babies out of wedlock were almost like outcasts. But many babies were born after 6 months of marriage. Then people forgot about it. I did not know until after Mama's funeral when I asked Hans to take me for a ride so I could ask him who Richard's father was. When he told me, I said, "Why didn't they get married?" He said, "Because they were just kids." Richard was raised by his grandparents and mine and was loved much. I can only remember Grandma Ellingson. Richard spent quite a bit of time at our house, as Dad had to have hired help when we were all small. I was very fond of him and also of Inga. When they married, they bought the small farm where Blanche grew up, and I spent much time at their house. She was such a good cook and kept a spotless house. Before Belford was born, we used to play rook when Inga's brother came over. Richard taught me how to tell time. I must have been about 10 and was embarrassed to ask anyone, as all my brothers knew, but Richard caught on that I didn't know. If anyone asked me what time it was, I would give the nearest number to the hand. After Mama died, Papa told me that he should have adopted Richard, but did not know about adoption in those days. Once I was at Richard and Inga's and had leg ache, as I often did. They gave me an aspirin, and it was first I'd ever seen or heard of. Then my parents got some aspirin, and it was such a godsend, as I suffered so much with leg ache, and Mama would rub my legs with liniment. Once I was stung by a scorpion on my foot. I yelled so loud that Mama ran to get the liniment. It turned out to be the laxative, and I made a sticky mess. The Watkins man and the Raleigh man came around in their fancy surreys, and we bought all of our medicine and flavorings from them. We children liked to see them come, as they would give us a stick of gum. I also had more than my share of severe earaches. Mama would heat butter in a spoon over the top of a coal oil lamp. I hollered because a hot spoon would burn my ear. Then she would put cotton in my ear and tie a cup towel around my head. I had earache at times until I had my tonsils removed when I was about 35. Aaron was supposed to come home from work to take me to the doctor's office to have my tonsils removed, but he called and said he could not get away. So I walked off by myself to catch the streetcar to town. My dear friend Mrs. Hill saw me leave and got dressed and came after me. The doctor did not put me to sleep, but gave me a local anesthetic, so I did not feel much. But I was so scared and kept holding my breath, and the doctor said, "Breathe." I knew when Mrs. Hill came in, I was so glad to have her. She stayed with me till Aaron came for us. The same two big girls who asked about my half-brother later became my good friends and were later embarrassed when they were at the blackboard doing algebra problems and could not understand something, so could not get the answer. The teacher, Ben Anderson, got very impatient and said, "I bet even Inez knows that." I was in the 5th grade while they were in the 8th or 9th. He turned to me and stated the problem again. I had no idea what he was talking about. I was too nervous to listen, but I heard him say A, B, C, and when he finished, he said, "Now what would that be?" I said, "C," and he said, "Of course." The girls must have hated me. Another time they had reason to dislike me was when the basketball coach appointed me to be captain when the two girls were both bigger and older than I. They could not run as fast nor jump as high as I could. I mentioned that Aaron and I were opposites in many ways, and that attracted us to each other. But we were alike in so many ways. We came from the same background, the same nationality, race, religion, education, and even region, so that we had the same friends and attended the same churches. He attended and was confirmed at the Rock Church. He rode a bicycle from Cranfill's Gap. At that time, there were steep hills to climb where you had to push it. I studied for confirmation at the Rock Church, but was confirmed at the new church at Cranfill's Gap. We never had to quarrel about whose church to attend, as it was our church. We were married at St. Olaf Lutheran at Cranfell's Gap. We started life's journey together on our honeymoon trip to Gary. I know that Aaron would agree that it was the best trip of all our many trips. Our union produced 5 beautiful children, at least to us, the parents. Their stories will be told in a sequel, either by me or one of them. Dolores was born in Gary, Indiana. The others, Johnny, Ned, Paul, and Diane, were born in Dallas. A closing thought from the pen of Henry Van Dyke. I shall grow old, but never lose life's zest, because the road's last turn will be the best. I love you all.
Huh? Don't forget to unplug yourself.
Oh, am I unplugged there?
No?
Well, unplug me. I don't want to go through life with this.